I only needed shelter. But that old braiding stand knew something about my family.
No apartment, no savings, no family room to return to, just a dented Buick and $5 she had kept folded inside her father's old leatherworking apron, and with that $5 she bought a carriage whipmaker's barn standing forgotten outside Westfield, Hampton County, Massachusetts, a place that had fallen off county work maps in 1971. Half the roof had fallen inward. Rain had rotted the north sill nearly through. The county condemned it on October 3, 2022, with a demolition planned for the following spring. But inside an 8-foot oak braiding stand was a sealed hollow compartment no one had opened in generations, holding money, records, and a secret that would alter what Harper believed a piece of honest work could mean. Before we continue, if stories like this mean something to you, hit subscribe. And tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel. Harper Ellis had been braiding her whole life without knowing it. As a child in western Massachusetts, she learned to keep her hands occupied whenever money grew thin. She braided grass beside parking lots, strips of grocery bags into cords, and leather scraps beneath the workbench where her father repaired saddles for people who still believed worn things deserved another season. Thomas Ellis was not a sentimental man. He measured twice, sharpened before every cut, and never allowed a damaged strap to leave his bench disguised beneath polish. When Harper asked why he spent an hour repairing work a customer might never inspect closely, he said only, "Because I will know." But the person who taught her to see leather differently was her grandfather, Samuel Ellis. Every other Saturday, beginning when Harper was 8, Samuel collected her in a green Ford pickup that smelled faintly of coffee and harness oil. He had spent 42 years repairing bridles, driving reins, traces, and old carriage tack, learning techniques from men whose own teachers had worked during the final years of horse-drawn commerce. His workshop stood behind a narrow house in Russell under 2 sugar maples. Samuel began each morning by warming leather between his palms before cutting it. He taught Harper to follow the hide instead of fighting it, to cut narrow strands from the strongest section, and to keep each strand under equal tension as it crossed the others. Sometimes he laid 4 strips across a wooden bench and made her begin again 10 times. Too loose. She started again. Now you're pulling angry. Again, at noon they ate cheddar sandwiches wrapped in wax paper while glue warmed near the stove, then returned to the bench until the winter light turned blue against the windows. Samuel's rule never changed. Your hands should leave a thing less afraid. Harper did not understand the sentence when she was 12. Years later, she understood that he meant force was easy. Care required restraint. A good maker learned exactly how much pressure something could bear without breaking. Samuel died during Harper's first year after high school. His workshop did not survive him. The property was sold quickly to cover debts, and by the time Harper arrived with the cardboard boxes, most of the old tools had already gone through an estate auction. The braiding knives, splitting gauges, harness punches, and Samuel's blackened wooden clamps disappeared into strangers' trucks. Her father kept only the leather apron. Then he died 4 years later. By 24, Harper owned almost nothing connected to either man except that apron, 2 photographs, and the habits they had placed in her hands. The flood came in September. 3 days of rain swelled the small river near the basement apartment Harper rented outside Springfield. Water entered first beneath the back door, thin as spilled tea. By midnight it was above her ankles. By morning the mattress floated crooked against the wall. Her landlord, Leonard Pike, arrived after the water receded. He wore polished brown shoes and stood on the basement stairs without stepping onto the mud-streaked floor. He spoke softly, which somehow made every sentence feel more final. The building was insured. Harper's belongings were not. When she asked about her security deposit, Pike looked at the swollen baseboards and wrote something on a yellow legal pad. "Tenant water damage," he said. The phrase was absurd enough that Harper waited for him to correct it. He did not. On October 2nd, he met her outside beneath a dripping aluminum awning. Harper had packed what remained into the Buick. On the pavement between them sat one object she could not fit anywhere, her father's wooden saddle stand, warped by floodwater. Pike held the apartment key between 2 fingers. Harper's mother, Elaine, stood beside him. She had driven over after Harper asked whether she could sleep in the spare room for a few weeks. Elaine kept both hands around her purse strap and looked toward the parking lot instead of at her daughter. Pike placed an envelope against the hood of the Buick. Harper opened it. Deposit withheld. Additional cleaning charges pending. You cannot charge me for a river flood. 8 words. Pike folded his legal pad closed. Elaine said nothing. Harper waited for her mother to object, to mention the photographs of brown water entering through the foundation vents, or simply to say that Harper could come home. Instead, Elaine reached down and brushed a leaf from her sleeve. Harper put the envelope inside the Buick, lifted the warped saddle stand into the dumpster herself, and drove away before dark. For the first week, she slept behind a 24-hour laundromat in Chicopee, where the dryer vents warmed one side of the parking lot and delivery trucks arrived before dawn. She had $83. She washed in library bathrooms, ate oatmeal from paper cups, and learned which gas stations did not notice a car parked too long. By the second week, she moved between West Springfield and Holyoke because sleeping in the same place made people begin to recognize her. One night, she parked beneath the bright security lamps of a hospital overflow lot. Another, she slept beside a closed bowling alley with her coat rolled beneath her neck. Her money fell to $47, then $31. The Buick needed gasoline more than she needed variety, so dinner became crackers, apples, and peanut butter eaten with the handle of a plastic spoon after the bowl had snapped away. At night, she folded Samuel's apron across her chest for warmth. 3 weeks became 4, then 5. In Northampton, a police officer tapped her window at 2:13 in the morning and told her she could not remain in a municipal lot. He was not cruel. That almost made it worse. She drove until the fuel needle touched empty and slept behind a closed garden center. By the beginning of the 6th week, she had $11.63. The $5 bill inside Samuel's apron had not been touched. She could not explain why. On a cold Tuesday afternoon, Harper entered the West Springfield Public Library because sleet had begun striking the Buick's windshield and the building was warm. She took a computer near the genealogy shelves and searched county auctions, room rentals, seasonal farm work, and abandoned property notices. Most listings required deposits, one did not. The advertisement had no photograph. County disposal. Former carriage whip workshop barn Westfield outskirts structure unsafe, no utilities guaranteed, quit claim, transfer $5 lot, buyer accepts all liability. Harper read it twice, then she noticed one line beneath the parcel number. Record, Ellis Whip Works. Her hand stopped on the mouse. Ellis, it was a common enough name to mean nothing. Still, she printed the notice for 10 cents, folded it into Samuel's apron beside the untouched bill, and walked back through the sleet. The Buick would not make many more unnecessary miles. So Harper decided the next ones would not be unnecessary. The following morning, she turned west toward Westfield to see what $5 could still buy. The Buick died 9 miles east of Westfield. It happened without drama, just one cough beneath the hood, a red battery light, and then silence as Harper rolled onto the gravel shoulder near a stand of bare maples. She sat with both hands on the steering wheel until a logging truck passed and shook the car gently in its wake. The repair estimate was more money than the Buick was worth. Harper took Samuel's apron, her backpack, the paper classified notice, and one blanket. A regional bus carried her as far as the eastern edge of Westfield for $3.25. From there, she walked because the parcel lay beyond the route, and because she had $7 left that were not the $5 bill. The first day, she covered 11 miles. By dusk, sleet had become dry snow, and Harper found an open-sided hay barn behind an unused pasture. She slept between 2 square bales with her boots inside the blanket so they would not freeze stiff. The temperature fell to 27 degrees. Mice moved somewhere in the rafters. At 3 in the morning, she woke with straw pressed against her cheek and heard horses breathing in a neighboring field, slow and unseen in the dark. She listened until dawn. Westfield appeared gradually the next morning. First came older houses with narrow porches, then traffic, brick storefronts, and signs stacked close together along the road. Harper passed Mason's Hardware, the Blue Cup Cafe, Westfield Shoe Repair, Porter's Feed and Grain, and a narrow shop called Bennett Clock Service where 12 clocks ticked behind the front glass. The city carried remnants of another century without arranging them for display. On one brick wall, faded white lettering showed the ghost of a whip company name beneath newer paint. Harper stopped. Westfield Whip. The remaining letters had disappeared beneath mortar repairs. She kept walking. The Hampton County Satellite Clerk's office occupied the ground floor of a municipal annex with fluorescent lighting and a brass directory by the door. Harper entered, carrying straw on the shoulder of her coat. A woman behind the counter looked up over narrow reading glasses. Her silver hair was cut square at the jaw, and one thumbnail was stained blue with carbon copy ink. The nameplate read, Margaret Voss Assistant Property. Clerk Harper unfolded the classified notice. I came about parcel 87. Margaret did not reach for it. You walked here most of the way. The clerk studied Harper's backpack, then the wet cuffs of her jeans. Identification. Harper slid her license across the counter. Margaret typed for nearly a minute. The printer beside her woke with a mechanical hum and produced 6 pages. Then she placed both hands flat on the counter. You understand the roof is structurally compromised. Yes, ma'am. You understand there is no certified electrical service. Yes, ma'am. You understand the well has not been tested since 1989. Yes, ma'am. You understand the demolition order becomes your responsibility the moment this transfer is recorded. Harper looked through the glass partition at the $5 bill lying beside her license. Yes, ma'am. Margaret held her gaze another moment. Most people ask whether they can tear these places down and sell the lumber. I want to know whether it can stay standing. Something changed in the clerk's face, but only slightly. She turned the papers around. Initial here, full signature there, Harper signed. The deed was a quitclaim transfer with more warnings than promises. Margaret took the $5 bill, smoothed it once against the counter, then fed the deed beneath an old brass recording stamp. The handle came down hard. Clack, the sound seemed much larger than $5. Margaret gave Harper directions carefully. Take Western Avenue west, turn onto Montgomery Road. Past the old pumping station, you'll see a stone wall broken by 2 white posts. Do not take the first dirt lane. Take the second. Walk about 3/4 of a mile. She paused while checking the deed again, then her fingers stopped on Harper's signature. Ellis. Harper waited. Margaret turned toward a filing cabinet. Your father from around here? Russell? Grandfather? Samuel Ellis? The clerk did not answer immediately. She opened a drawer and removed an index card yellowed at the edges. I knew that name. Harper stepped closer. Margaret read something silently. My father took harness work to Samuel Ellis. Must have been 30 years ago. Maybe more. He repaired tack. He repaired everything leather if you were patient enough to wait. Margaret smiled once. He refused to hurry stitching. That sounded like him. Harper touched the edge of the counter. Did he work in Westfield? Not that I knew. Margaret turned the index card toward herself again. But Ellis was an old whip-making name here. She tapped the deed. This property was Ellis Whip Works. I saw that. No. Margaret shook her head. I mean, before the parcel numbers, before half these roads had names. She looked toward the empty waiting chairs as though someone else might overhear. There were so many whip shops in Westfield that people used to call it Whip City. Big factories downtown, little workshops farther out. Braiders, platers, handle makers. Her finger returned to Harper's surname. One branch of the Ellis family worked leather. Harper felt the weight of Samuel's apron inside her backpack. Was it his family? I cannot tell you that. Margaret closed the drawer. Records disappear. Names repeat. Then more softly she added, but I would not throw anything away until you know what you have. Outside, the day had warmed enough to loosen the snow into dripping water. Harper followed Western Avenue and turned where Margaret had instructed. By late afternoon, sidewalks gave way to shoulders and scattered houses. A man in a wool cap stood beside a mailbox splitting kindling with a small axe. His dog saw Harper first. It was an elderly black Labrador with a white muzzle. The animal trotted to the roadside, stopped 6 feet away, and sniffed the air. You looking for the old whip barn? The man called. Harper nodded. You bought it? I think so. He rested the axe against his boot. Then you're the first owner it's had in years who actually showed up. He pointed west. Second lane, walnut trees on both sides. Dog's name is Moses. Mine's Walter. Moses wagged once. Walter did not ask what Harper intended to do with the place. She appreciated him for that immediately. The lane began between collapsed stone walls and climbed gently through black walnut trees whose branches crossed high overhead. Then the barn appeared. It was larger than Harper had imagined, roughly 30 feet wide and nearly 60 feet long, built on a low fieldstone foundation. Weathered clapboards showed red paint beneath decades of gray. The eastern roof line had sagged inward over perhaps 12 feet, exposing broken rafters like ribs. A brick chimney rose crooked but intact from the rear half. Above the main doors hung a wooden sign. Most of its lettering had faded. Ellis Carriage Whips Plating and Repair. Harper stood beneath it until cold entered her gloves. The county lock on the door matched the key Margaret had given her. It resisted twice, then turned. The door opened 6 inches and stopped against debris. Harper pushed with her shoulder. Something wooden scraped across the floor. Air came out first. It smelled of dust, damp boards, mouse nests, and something darker beneath them. Leather, old leather. Harper stepped inside. The front room held a long counter, 2 stools, and empty shelving furred with dust. Broken window glass clicked beneath her boots. Somewhere inside the wall, a mouse scratched and became still. She ran one finger along the counter. The dust was cold. Behind it lay a second room separated by a wide doorway. Here the ceiling rose higher and iron hooks hung from beams blackened by age. A strip of hardened leather lay curled on the floor like bark. Harper bent and picked it up. It cracked faintly when she flexed it. For an instant she smelled Samuel's workshop. Warm harness oil, coffee, whetstone water. Then the present returned with a drop of rain falling through the damaged roof. It struck a metal pan someone had left decades ago. Ping. Harper moved deeper. Her boots found different voices in the floorboards, a tight pine squeak near the doorway, a hollow complaint beneath the western window, a solid oak thump near the back wall. She stopped at an object nearly as tall as the room. The braiding stand rose more than 8 feet from a heavy oak base with iron guides, worn pegs, and a central wooden upright polished smooth where generations of hands had touched it. Harper placed her palm against the wood. It was colder than the air. In the rear room she found an old cast-iron stove, a stone sink without running water, and a narrow door leading outside toward the well. She tested the stove damper. Frozen. The chimney could not be trusted, so there would be no fire. Her first meal in the barn was half an apple, crackers softened with water, and the last spoonfuls of peanut butter scraped from the jar. Darkness came early. Harper chose a place on the front room floor beneath the strongest section of roof. She swept it with an old horsehair broom, laid down flattened cardboard found behind the counter, then spread her blanket over it. The temperature indoors fell almost as quickly as outside. She kept her coat on. Before lying down, she walked once more to the braiding stand. Moonlight entered through the broken windows and caught the iron fittings and pale lines. Harper touched one of the worn wooden pegs. Someone had stood here every day. Someone had measured tension with fingers. Someone had cut leather thin enough to braid around a flexible core and worked until the strands became one continuous surface. The building was not beautiful. It was not safe. It did not yet feel like shelter, but beneath Harper's hand, the oak had been worn smooth by people who had expected their work to outlive the day they made it. She left her palm there until her fingers warmed the wood. Some things survived because someone was careful enough to keep them. For the first 3 days, Harper did not repair anything. She learned the place. The well stood 40 paces behind the barn beneath a leaning cedar cover. She lowered the rusted bucket slowly, heard it strike water after 9 seconds, and brought up something clear enough to see through but carrying a faint mineral smell. Until it could be tested, she boiled every cup on a small camp stove borrowed from Walter. The outhouse was farther uphill, half hidden by sumac, with one hinge gone and a floor sound enough only if she stepped near the walls. Inside the barn, she memorized the boards. 1 squeaked beneath the front counter. 3 near the west wall bowed under weight. A short oak plank beside the braiding room gave a sharp double creak that began to sound almost like company. On the 4th morning, she walked back into Westfield carrying a handwritten list. Mason's Hardware occupied a narrow brick storefront that smelled of linseed oil, rope, metal filings, and the dry wooden drawers of old fasteners. Glass jars of screws stood behind the counter, and a ceiling fan turned so slowly that one blade carried a visible patch of dust around and around. The owner was Edwin Mason. He had one white eyebrow and one brown one, as though age had begun changing him and then reconsidered. "You're the whip barn girl, Harper." "I heard." He unfolded her list: chimney brush, stove cement, work gloves, lantern fuel, roofing tarp. Edwin read the last figure in her notebook. "How much money do you actually have?" Harper told him. He put the list down. "That answer was worse than I expected. I need the chimney safe first." "Correct." He walked to a shelf and returned with a thin paperback manual whose orange cover had faded nearly yellow. "Home repair for owner builders, 1978 edition, free," he said. "I can pay later." That is what free means. Harper looked at the supplies again. Edwin took a small account book from beneath the register. "I'll give you 30 days. I cannot promise 30. Then promise honest." She met his eyes. "I can promise honest." He wrote Ellis barn account across the top of a page. A 6-inch wire chimney brush cost $8.75. 2 lengths of fiberglass rod were $4.20 each. A tub of furnace cement was $3.65. A pair of leather work gloves, $5.995. Lamp oil, $2.10. A heavy canvas tarp from the back room cost $12 because Edwin refused to charge her the marked price. He placed the manual on top. "Read before climbing. I will not know, read before touching." That sounded enough like Samuel that Harper nearly smiled. She began with the chimney the next morning. The stovepipe came apart reluctantly, each joint shedding black flakes onto newspaper spread across the floor. Harper covered the stove opening, climbed to the attic crawl space, and inspected the brickwork with a flashlight before going outside. The upper chimney looked ugly but stable. She tied a rope around her waist, anchored it to a sound walnut trunk, and crossed the least damaged roof section on hands and knees. From the chimney top, she lowered the 6-inch brush one fiberglass section at a time. The first pull barely moved. She twisted clockwise. Creosote broke loose inside with the sound of dry gravel. Again. Down 6 feet, twist, pull, tap the flue wall, withdraw. She repeated the sequence until her shoulders burned. After 2 hours, a black mound had collected inside the stove below. Some deposits were powdery soot. Others came loose as brittle glazed pieces dark enough to shine. Harper stopped when she found those. She opened the manual. Glazed creosote meant hotter previous fires and greater chimney fire risk, so she brushed again. She worked 4 hours the first day and 3 the next, alternating from the top and the stove opening until the brush passed freely through the full flue. Then she used a mirror and flashlight to inspect what she could see. No obvious blockage, no bird nest, no collapsed liner. The mortar would need attention later, but the passage was open. Harper waited until afternoon before testing it. She crumpled 1 sheet of newspaper inside the stove, added pencil-thick dry twigs, then 2 pieces of split hardwood Walter had left near the door without explanation. She lit the paper. For 1 second, smoke curled toward her. Then the draft caught. The flame leaned upward. Smoke disappeared into the flue. Harper crouched with one hand on the floor and watched until the first pieces of wood had become steady orange coals. Only then did she add another split. The cast iron began making small metallic ticks as it warmed. That evening she ate her first hot meal inside the barn: 1 potato boiled in a dented saucepan, half an onion, salt packets saved from diners. She mashed everything with a fork and ate sitting on an overturned crate while heat spread perhaps 6 feet from the stove. It was enough. Afterward, Harper began examining the workroom properly. She found a narrow leather splitter with its blade rusted but unbroken. A bone-handled plaiting knife lay beneath a drawer liner hardened by age. There were 3 wooden braiding clamps polished dark at their jaws, a brass gauge marked in 32nds of an inch, 2 bundles of dried rawhide strands tied with linen thread, and a long whalebone core flexible enough to bend almost double without snapping. On the wall hung a rack containing 7 tapered wooden whip handles. One still carried faint pencil marks showing intervals where braided covering had once been measured. Harper touched nothing unnecessarily. She photographed each object before moving it. Samuel had taught her that too, though never with a camera. Know where a thing belongs before you disturb it. The 8-foot braiding stand occupied the center of the room. In daylight, she could see how deliberate its construction was. A heavy oak base anchored 2 uprights. Iron guides controlled strand separation, and a rotating head allowed tension to be maintained while a plaiter walked backward from the work. The wood showed thousands of shallow cuts. Not careless cuts, working cuts. Harper cleaned the stand with a dry brush. Near the base, the sound changed. She stopped, tapped again with 1 knuckle, solid oak, 2 inches left. Solid, then a lower note. Hollow. Harper crouched. The base looked like a single timber, almost 14 inches wide and nearly 5 feet long. She tested it by pushing against the stand. It did not shift. She tried lifting one corner using a short pry bar. The weight was wrong, heavy but not evenly heavy. She moved the bar to the opposite end. That side rose sooner. Harper sat back on her heels. For the next hour she did nothing but inspect. No visible hinge, no modern screws. No obvious seam except a circular wooden plug near the rear face of the base, almost hidden beneath hardened wax and grime. It was cedar. Oak around it. Cedar within it. Someone had chosen different wood on purpose. Harper cleaned the circle with the tip of a dry cloth. A narrow slot appeared. Not a screw slot, a turning slot. She found a flat piece of steel among the old tools, inserted it gently, and rotated the disc. Nothing. She pressed inward while turning. The cedar moved 1/8 of an inch, then clicked. Harper withdrew her hand. She stood and walked outside. The afternoon was cold and clear. She went to the well, drank from the boiled water in her bottle, and waited until her breathing slowed. Then she returned. The cedar disc came free in her palm. Behind it was a dark opening. Harper inserted 2 fingers and felt iron, a recessed latch. She pulled. A section of the oak base released along a seam so exact that dirt had concealed it for decades. This compartment was nearly 3 feet long. Inside were packages wrapped in oilcloth. Harper did not remove them all at once. She carried the first to the counter, unwrapped it. A set of 8 plaiting tools lay inside, each protected in oiled wool. Fine awls, a strand beveler, 2 narrow knives, a polished fid, and a small splitting gauge bearing the initials S.E. She touched the initials once, then stopped. The second package held raw material, bundles of preserved kangaroo leather lace, calfskin strips, linen thread, and several long pale cores wrapped in waxed paper. Whalebone, illegal to trade now, but old enough to belong to another world of craft. The third object was a rectangular tin box. It had no lock. Harper lifted the lid. Inside were cloth-wrapped rolls. She opened one. Coins.gold. She closed it immediately. For several seconds, the only sound in the room was the stove. Then Harper opened the roll again. She counted at the counter under the lantern. $20 Liberty Head gold pieces, $10 Indian head eagles, $5 half eagles, older silver dollars packed between layers of cotton. Beneath the coins lay folded currency, brittle at the edges but carefully sleeved in waxed paper. Along with newer bills apparently added years later, Harper wrote every amount before moving to the next bundle, then counted again, then a third time. The total value, written on the envelopes and currency packages, came to $39,000 exactly, though Harper knew the old coins themselves might be worth something different now. At the bottom of the tin lay a small military medal suspended from a faded ribbon. World War I Victory Medal. 19. She did not polish it. Under the medal was a ledger. Brown leather cover. Handwritten pages. Harper opened only the first. The entries were not ordinary shop accounts. Horse descriptions appeared beside names: bay mare, left hock scar, gray gelding, collar sores, chestnut team, ribs visible. There were purchase amounts, former owners, new placements, and beside dozens of entries, one repeated phrase, bought out of service. Harper turned another page. More horses. Some had been bought from freight companies, some from abusive private owners. A few entries recorded veterinary treatment before the animals were sent to farms, church properties, or families whose names were written carefully in the margin. Harper closed the ledger. Beneath it lay an envelope. Her name was not written there. No name was. Only 4 words for the one who finds this. Harper did not open it. Outside, evening had settled over the walnut trees. She carried the envelope to the doorway, then left it inside on the counter and walked toward the low, wet ground beyond the barn. There was a narrow creek there, fuller from autumn rain, moving black between stones. Harper sat on a fallen trunk. $39,000 remained behind her. So did the ledger, so did the metal. She watched water fold around one pale rock and join itself again downstream. For 6 weeks she had measured every day in dollars lost, gasoline, food, a bus ticket, 10 cents for a classified notice. No money waited inside the barn in an amount large enough to change every practical calculation she had made. Still, she did not go back to count it again. The unopened envelope mattered more. Darkness covered the creek until only its sound remained. Some things survive because someone was careful enough to keep them. Morning came pale through the broken eastern windows. Harper made coffee on the camp stove, then carried the unopened envelope to the workbench. When she turned it over, she saw the handwriting more clearly. Narrow capitals, long descending loops, and an unusual hooked E. Samuel had written his grocery lists that way, not the same hand, the same taut hand. Harper unfolded the paper. My dear one, whoever you are, if you have opened this, then the stand has finally given up what I asked it to keep. My name is Eleanor May Ellis. I am writing in Springfield, Massachusetts on March the 18th, 1987, after Dr. Nathaniel Crow told me that the cancer in my pancreas has traveled farther than surgery can follow. He spoke kindly. I appreciated that. Kindness does not alter a measurement, but it can make a person willing to hear one. There are things in this barn that belong neither to me nor entirely to you. Our family came into this work through Josiah Ellis, born in 1832 near Westfield, who began plaiting whips in 1851 and opened this shop after the war years. His daughter, Rebecca Ellis, born in 1878, learned strand cutting here and kept the accounts after 1900. Her son, Arthur Ellis, born in 1906 in Russell, carried repair work west when carriage trade failed. Arthur's son, Daniel Ellis, born in 1934, became a saddler, and the knowledge passed through hands even when the building did not. The trade here closed on October 17, 1954. After that, the stand was silent. More than 30 years have passed since a working whip came off it. The metal in the box belonged to my brother, Thomas Ellis, who served with the American Expeditionary Forces in France during the First World War. He returned alive, though not unchanged, and he would not speak of certain fields. He kept horses afterward and would not permit one to be struck in his presence. That matters because of the ledger. Josiah began buying horses when owners brought broken harnesses here and complained that the animal was useless. Some were lame, some starved, some had sores deep enough to take a finger. He paid what the owner demanded, then placed the horse where it could work lightly or not at all. He called it buying them out of service. Do not turn him into a saint. He was a tradesman who saw suffering in front of him and decided that seeing created an obligation. The money in the compartment came from 4 generations of work, sale proceeds, and savings set aside after the shop closed. Use what is needed to keep the building honest. Do not spend it to make the place impressive. You will also find tools. Keep the plaiting knives sharp enough to cut by drawing, never sawing. When you split leather, aim first for 1/16 inch and thin only after the strand is even. For dressing dry hide, warm the mixture no hotter than 110 degrees Fahrenheit. 2 parts tallow, 1 part beeswax, worked in with the palm while the leather is warm, not hot. When plaiting over a core, stop every 12 inches and roll the work under a hardwood board for 30 slow passes. Uneven tension hides well for a day and badly for a lifetime. There is a stone marker beyond the back door, near the old walnut root. It bears the same cross-strand mark cut into the small brass gauge. Leave it where it is. Inheritance is not owning what another person left. It is deciding what work you are willing to continue. A tool kept clean is inheritance. A roof made sound before winter is inheritance. An animal not beaten because one person refused to look away is inheritance. If no one in the family found this, perhaps that is fitting. Blood is one way work travels, teaching is another. Take only what you can care for. Leave something useful behind. The house is not empty, it has been waiting. You are welcome here. Eleanor May Ellis, March 18, 1987. Harper read the letter twice. The second time, she slowed over the technical instructions, hearing Samuel's voice without supplying words he had never spoken. Then she folded the paper along its original creases, not new ones, original ones. She placed it beside the ledger, put on her coat, and went through the back door. The ground had hardened overnight. Near the largest walnut tree, old leaves had collected against one exposed root. Harper moved them aside with her boot. Nothing. She circled the trunk. On the north side, half buried beneath moss and black soil, stood a field stone about the size of a bread loaf. She knelt and brushed it clean. 2 narrow lines crossed at the center, then separated into 4 braided arcs, the same mark engraved on the brass gauge. Harper traced it once with her thumb. She did not move the stone. Back inside, she searched the workroom shelves until she found an old brass kerosene lamp beneath a cloth stiff with dust. The wick mechanism still turned. She cleaned the chimney glass, trimmed the blackened wick with the Samuel's bone-handled knife, filled the reservoir with fresh lamp oil, and struck a match. The flame rose uncertainly, then steadied. Amber light settled across the braiding stand. Harper sat on the floor beside it. She began thinking about people who had given her something small without knowing what would come after. Margaret Voss had stamped a $5 deed and warned her not to throw anything away. Walter had left 2 pieces of split hardwood beside a cold stove and never mentioned them. Edwin Mason had opened a credit account for someone with almost no money and written only one condition into the conversation: promise honest. Even the police officer in Northampton, waking her at 2:13 in the morning, had waited until her engine started before driving away. None of those acts had solved her life. That was not why they mattered. They had moved her one measured distance forward. Before we leave this moment, think of one small kindness someone once gave you when they had no idea how badly you needed it. Who was that person and what did they do? Tell us in the comments if you can. Sometimes the smallest help is the part of a hard season we remember longest. That night, Harper returned the money to the hidden compartment. She kept only the letter, the ledger, the brass gauge, and the old tools beside her sleeping place. The lamp burned low on the counter. Before closing her eyes, she folded Samuel's apron beneath her head and placed Eleanor's letter inside it, where the $5 bill had once been. The first real snow came on December 2nd. 6.5 inches settled over the walnut roots and entered the barn through the broken eastern roof in a white slant that did not melt until afternoon. Harper stood beneath it with the 1978 repair manual open on the counter. She read the roofing chapter 3 times. The damaged plane measured 28 feet by 32. Allowing for overlap and waste, she calculated 31 bundles of asphalt shingles, 3 rolls of felt, and 16 pounds of galvanized roofing nails. Edwin Mason looked at the figures. You forgot what old roofs hide. What? More roof. He lent her a roofing hatchet that had belonged to his older brother, its handle dark from decades of palms. 2 mornings later, Walter brought a man named Amos Bell. Amos was 73, narrow as a fence rail, and had roofed houses for 40 years before arthritis pushed him down from ladders. Harper offered him money. No, at least let me pay something. No. He pointed at the roof. Show me where you start. They sistered the worst rafters first, bolting new dimensional lumber alongside old members instead of cutting away what could still carry weight. Harper learned to snap a chalk line without letting it drag through wet felt. Amos watched her drive the first shingle nail. That nail's proud. Harper reached for the hammer. Pull it. 3 strokes became the rule. 1 to set, 1 to drive, 1 to seat the head flush without crushing the shingle. For 11 days they worked whenever wind allowed it. Harper hauled bundles up 1 at a time, knees bruised beneath borrowed pads, fingers stiff around the hatchet before noon. On December 14th, they laid the final ridge course. That night, snow began again. Harper stood beneath the repaired section and listened. Nothing struck the floor. No dripping pan, no cold water slipping down a rafter, only snow brushing the roof above her. January belonged to brick. Once Harper could trust the roof, she turned to the chimney and found the upper courses worse than they had appeared from below. Several bricks were spalling at the faces and mortar powdered beneath the point of a screwdriver. Amos told her not to use hard modern cement against old masonry. Edwin ordered hydraulic lime. Harper mixed repair mortar in small batches, 2 parts clean sand to 1 part hydraulic lime, adding fire clay at roughly 1 part to 3 for the joints closest to the flue where heat mattered most. She worked 3 weeks in temperatures that rarely rose above the 20s. Gloves made the joints clumsy, bare hands made them exact. So she removed the gloves, packed mortar, tooled the joint, put the gloves back on, and waited for feeling to return. Every 15 minutes her fingers went numb. She kept a kettle warm on the stove and wrapped both hands around it until pain returned in sharp needles. Bad brick was removed one at a time. Replacement brick was dampened before bedding. Deep joints were packed in layers rather than filled carelessly at the face. By late January, the repaired stack stood straighter without looking new. Harper waited through the cure period before lighting the test fire. 1 sheet of paper, kindling, then a small hardwood split. She stepped outside. A thin gray ribbon rose cleanly from the chimney and moved east with the wind. Inside, no smoke escaped a joint, no bitter smell collected beneath the ceiling. Harper added another log. The draft held. The floors came next. Beneath, soot, dirt, and decades of bootwear were white pine planks fastened with hand-cut rose-head nails, many of them still tight enough to keep. Harper refused to replace boards merely because they looked old. She reset loose nails with a small punch, countersinking only enough to protect the sanding pad, then rented a random orbit floor sander from Mason's for $14 a day. The first pass used 80 grit. It revealed scars, the second 120. It softened them without erasing them. The final pass, 220 grit, left the surface smooth enough for oil while keeping the shallow waves made by hand planing long before electric tools existed. Harper vacuumed every seam, wiped the boards clean, and applied the first oil coat on her knees. The wood darkened immediately. Not brown, honey first, then deeper. By the third coat, after careful wiping between applications, the floor had shifted toward mahogany in the evening light. She left it untouched for 48 hours to cure. There was one morning when she did none of this. She woke before dawn with her body refusing every instruction her mind gave it. Boots remained beside the blanket, tools remained where she had left them. Harper walked to the marsh instead. A great blue heron stood in the shallows on one leg, so still that frost formed silver around the grass behind it. For nearly an hour she watched the bird hunt. It moved only when movement mattered. One step waited another. Harper went back to the barn at noon and did not pick up a tool. She heated soup, mended a glove, then slept. The floors could wait one day. Nothing was lost. There were 8 windows. 3 had no glass at all. 4 held cracked panes patched with cardboard, tar paper, or nothing. The 8th contained one original pane, wavy and imperfect, with small bubbles trapped inside the glass. Harper removed that pane first. She wrapped it in wool and stored it flat beneath the workbench. On the sash, beneath layers of paint, she found a faint, scratched date. Whether the sash itself was that old, she could not prove. The glass stayed. For the remaining windows, she removed loose points, softened failed putty carefully, and bedded replacement glass in fresh DAP-33 glazing compound. Each pane was pressed just enough to seat without squeezing the entire putty bed away. Glazing points held the glass. Then came the exterior bevel. Harper drew the putty knife in one continuous stroke whenever she could, keeping the line clean enough to shed water rather than merely look neat. The sash cords were worse. Several had rotted through inside the weight pockets. She replaced them with 1/4-inch cotton sash cord, feeding each line over the pulley and tying a figure-8 knot where it joined the counterweight. The first repaired sash rose too quickly. Harper laughed once when it nearly struck the top of the frame. She adjusted the balance. The second held at shoulder height. The third stayed exactly where she left it. By the final window, February light had begun lingering longer in the afternoons. Harper lifted the restored sash into its opening, connected the last counterweight, and tested the motion. Up, down, hold. Outside, a chickadee landed on a bare walnut branch less than 6 feet from the glass. Its black eyes appeared almost level with hers. Harper stopped with one hand still on the sash. The bird tilted its head, then flew. She lowered the window gently until the meeting rails touched. The walls waited until late February. Most of the original finish was horsehair plaster laid over hand-split oak lath, and Harper discovered quickly that old walls punished impatience. Her first patch beside the chimney cracked overnight. The second sagged. The third separated cleanly from the lath and landed on the floor before breakfast. Edwin arrived carrying an old feed sack. My father kept horsehair for plaster. Harper stared at him. Of course he did. She mixed lime plaster in smaller batches, working the cleaned horsehair through it until the fibers distributed evenly. The first coat was pressed hard through the lath and scored while green. The brown coat went on 3/8 of an inch thick. She left it 72 hours. Then came the finish coat, barely 1/8 of an inch, drawn smooth with a steel trowel whose corners she had rounded by hand. The repaired wall did not look new. That pleased her. Under lamplight, the old surface and new work held different textures but belonged to the same room. Harper ran her fingertips across the cured edge. These patches will hold another 100 years. By then, people had begun leaving things. Doris Hale, who owned the Blue Cup Cafe, was a broad-shouldered woman with flour permanently caught in the seam of her wedding ring. She never knocked. Every few days, Harper found a brown paper bag on the doorstep. 2 biscuits wrapped in wax paper, a jar of bean soup. Once, an entire chicken pie still warm at the center. Harper finally carried money into the cafe. Doris pushed it back across the counter with one finger. You can pay me later. When? Doris looked toward the old Whip Company photograph hanging above the register. In candles when the shop reopens, that was all. A week later, a boy named Caleb Mercer arrived on a blue Schwinn bicycle carrying a splitting maul across his handlebars. He could not have been more than 16. One bootlace was yellow and the other black. Without introducing himself, he began splitting the rounds Walter had left beside the woodshed. Harper came outside. I can do that. I know. Then why are you doing it? He set another round upright, my mother said. About your grandfather. He swung. The wood opened cleanly. Harper tried to give him $5 when he finished. Caleb looked genuinely offended. He tied the maul back across the bicycle and rode away. Reverend Boyd was different. He was an elderly black man who walked Montgomery Road every morning in a charcoal overcoat, carrying a cane with a silver-colored handle worn dull from use. He never entered unless invited. Each morning, when Harper was working outside, he tipped his hat. One cold Tuesday, he stopped by the repaired chimney. May good work remain. 4 words. Then he continued down the road. Harper stood with a mortar trowel in her hand until he disappeared beyond the walnut trees. Harper postponed the cellar until February 11th. The entrance was behind a warped plank door beneath the back stairs, and when she finally descended with a lantern, 7 granite steps carried her into a room 12 feet by 15. The floor was a fieldstone. At the center lay one dressed granite slab, smoother than everything around it. Carved into the stone was the cross-strand craft mark. Harper crouched beside it. She tested the edges with her fingertips. The slab was too deliberate to be accidental. She did not lift it. Eleanor had written that inheritance meant deciding what work to continue, not opening every hidden thing merely because a person could. Harper left the stone alone. On the way back upstairs, her lantern caught a straight edge beneath the 3rd granite step. She reached into the gap. A small oak box had been wedged deep against the riser. Inside lay a brass key. Its bow had been forged into a looping braided shape, 2 strands crossing and returning like the mark on the stone. Beneath it was a tintype. A young woman stood outside the barn in summer light. She held a narrow plaiting knife. Her hair was pinned high, her sleeves rolled above the wrists. Harper stared at the face, not identical, but near enough that she set the photograph down. The same narrow chin, the same heavy left eyebrow. The same way one shoulder sat slightly higher than the other. On the back, scratched carefully into the metal, were the words Rebecca Ellis, daughter of Josiah Ellis, age 25, summer of 1903. Harper carried the tintype upstairs. The brass key went onto the mantel beside Eleanor's letter. She tried it in no lock. She did not know what it opened. Snow withdrew unevenly in March, first from the southern wall, then from the stone lane. The creak grew loud enough to hear from the workroom, and green walnut catkins appeared where winter had seemed permanent only weeks before. Harper cleaned the plaiting tools. She sharpened the knives. She prepared leather according to Eleanor's instructions, but she did not begin making a full carriage whip, not yet. Instead, she chose one old silver coin from the cache and exchanged only what was necessary for fresh leather, dressing materials, and practice cores. She cut 12-inch samples, then 18, 4 strands, 6, 8. Most were uneven. She kept every failed piece. The house was patient, so was she. 2 winters later, in December 2024, Harper finished the first complete whip made in the barn in 70 years. She did not begin it for a customer. There was no customer. She made it because the practice pieces had stopped arguing with her hands. The handle was ash, shaped slowly and sealed with oil. Over the flexible core, she laid 8 strands of dark brown leather, each beveled thin at the edges so the finished braid would lie smooth beneath the palm. She plaited standing at the restored oak stand, 12 inches. Stop, check tension, roll beneath the hardwood board, 30 slow passes. Continue. When she reached the transition near the keeper, she found one strand pulling too hard. 2 years earlier, she might have hidden it. Instead, she undid 11 inches, then began that section again. By evening, the finished piece lay across the workbench. Harper did not raise it. She did not crack it. She ran one hand along the braid and felt where 8 separate strands had become one surface, then she hung it beneath the old sign. The barn itself had changed without losing the evidence of what it had survived. The floors still dipped near the western wall. Old tool scars remained visible beneath the oil. One window held its wavering original glass, turning winter light slightly uneven across the front room. The stove drew clean. The chimney stood sound. Nothing matched perfectly. Everything worked. The brass key remained on the mantel until the following spring. Harper found the lock by accident. A windstorm broke a dead limb from the largest walnut tree behind the barn. While cutting the branch into manageable lengths, she noticed a green stain beneath a patch of loose bark. Copper. She removed only the dead bark. A narrow brass plate had been set into the trunk decades earlier and slowly enclosed by the growing tree. At its center was a keyhole. Harper went inside. The braided brass key fit without resistance. Behind the plate was a narrow metal-lined cavity. Inside lay oilcloth. Harper removed it carefully. The first object was a folded 48-star American flag, small enough to have been carried rather than flown over a building. The second was a note. Rebecca Ellis had written it on June 18, 1944, while American families waited for news from a war whose outcome no one yet knew. If this tree is still standing, then someone cared long enough not to cut it. Thomas carried this flag home from France after the last war. He made me promise it would not become decoration. A flag is cloth until someone asks another human being to die beneath it. After that, we should handle it carefully. If another war has taken one of ours, do not use this family to speak proudly of war. We have never paid enough to speak proudly. Remember the ones who came home altered. Remember the horses that carried what men could not. Remember that endurance is not permission to ask for more suffering. R.E.C. Harper read it outside beneath the walnut. Then she refolded the flag along the existing lines. She placed both objects in an archival box rather than returning them to the tree. The cavity remained empty. The brass plate went back into place. On November 11th, she carried Thomas Ellis's 1919 Victory Medal to the Massachusetts Veterans Memorial Cemetery in Agawam. There was no public ceremony connected to the family. Harper wanted none. She stood quietly among the graves on Veterans Day, held the medal through a clean cotton cloth, and read Thomas's name from the small card she had made from the family records. She did not leave the medal outdoors. She brought it home. Honoring something did not require losing it. The $39,000 remained mostly where it had been found. Harper used 4 coins. 1 purchased the first leather and practice materials. 1 paid for historically appropriate window glass. 2 helped cover structural lumber when prices rose beyond what her repair account could carry. She documented each one. The rest she wrapped again, placed in archival sleeves and containers, and returned to the oak compartment with the ledger, leaving copies for preservation elsewhere. On the inside of the compartment door, Harper fixed a small card. For the next one. She did not explain further. The shop reopened so quietly that Harper almost missed the moment herself. Doris made it happen. One April morning, Harper entered the Blue Cup Cafe and found an index card pinned to the corkboard near the register. Ellis Braiding and Leather. Repairs mo work, only hand repairs, straps. Historic plaiting ask. Doris, for the mailing card. Harper stared at it. You did not ask me. Doris poured coffee. You would have said no. Within 6 months, more than 40 names appeared on a handwritten mailing list. Some wanted a repairs. Some wanted to learn when small workshop days would begin. One woman mailed a harness strap from Vermont that had belonged to her grandfather. Harper repaired it but refused to erase its wear. A man in Connecticut sent photographs of an old carriage whip and asked for a reproduction. Harper wrote back that she was not ready. He waited. That became part of the business. People waited. One Saturday in October, Caleb returned. He was taller. The Schwinn was gone. He arrived in a dented pickup with a long object wrapped in an old moving blanket. Need help? Harper looked at the shape. With what? He carried it beneath the original exterior sign, then removed the blanket. He had carved a new board from walnut. The lettering matched the faded proportions of the old sign as closely as his hand could manage. Only 2 words appeared on it. Daughters. Harper looked from the board to Caleb. There were no daughters on the original sign. I know. Then why does it say that? Caleb shrugged because there were Rebecca, Eleanor. Others whose names had disappeared from ledgers written by men. Harper ran her thumb across the carved D. You made this? Mostly. What does mostly mean? My shop teacher stopped me from ruining the spacing. Harper laughed. They mounted the board below the original sign rather than replacing it. Ellis Carriage Whips Plating and Repair and Daughters. Caleb stepped backward into the lane, crooked, a little. You want me to fix it? Harper looked at the old building behind the letters. No. That winter, she began her own letter. She used plain cotton paper and one of Samuel's sharpened pencils. For 10 minutes she could not write the first sentence. Then she understood there was only one honest place to begin. My dear one, whoever you are, she wrote about the flood, not everything. Enough. She wrote that buildings could be rescued without being made new. That money hidden in a wall could become dangerous if the finder believed it was permission rather than responsibility. That a strand must be cut evenly before it can carry equal tension. That stopping to undo poor work was sometimes the fastest way forward. She wrote Edwin's name, Doris.Walter.Caleb Margaret Voss, Reverend Boyd. She wrote that no one had saved her. They had each carried one small portion of weight until she could carry the next part herself. Then Harper stopped. Outside, evening settled over the creek. The walnut trees were bare. Through the workroom window she could see the repaired roof line, the cellar door, and the branch where the chickadee had once watched her finish the final sash. On the wall hung the first completed whip. Below it waited a row of practice pieces, including the worst one she had ever braided. She kept that one nearest the bench. Some things survived because someone was careful enough to keep them. Harper folded her unfinished letter and placed it in Samuel's leather apron. She would add to it later, perhaps for years. The tools did not need an heir yet, neither did the money. The work only needed another morning. Before turning out the lamp, Harper opened the front door and listened to the creek moving beyond the walnut trees. Cold air entered. The floor gave its familiar double creak beneath her boot. She closed the door gently. The carriage whip maker's barn waits. It has always waited. Years afterward, Margaret Voss still kept one unusual object in the shallow drawer beneath her brass recording stamp. A $5 bill. She had never deposited it. On the day Harper signed the deed, Margaret had replaced the county payment with $5 of her own and folded Harper's worn bill into the drawer instead. No one had asked her to. No record mentioned it. The bill remained there, flattened beneath an old index card bearing one surname, Ellis.